Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Left, Wrong, and Center. Today, I have my first guest ever. I'm very excited to welcome Daria Devlin to the podcast. Daria Devlin is running for Mayor of Erie. She is a lifelong Erie resident, a proud East Bayfront native, and committed advocate for health, education, and economic equity in our community. She currently serves as the Director of Social Impact for the Hammett Health Foundation, where she is leading efforts to address the social drivers of health throughout housing and neighborhood revitalization. Daria has led transformative projects across Erie, including building the coalition that successfully advocated for $14 million for Erie Public Schools during a critical funding crisis, founding the Partnership for Erie's Public Schools, and establishing the Erie Center for the Arts and Technology, where she oversaw a $12 million renovation of the former Wayne School into a community resource center. Daria has been recognized during her 15 years in nonprofit leadership by the Erie Times News for Under 40, as well as the MLK Center, and was named 2023 CEO of the Year by the Nonprofit Partnership. In addition to her professional work, Daria has served as an elected member of the Erie School Board, including as the board president, and sits on the boards of the Erie Western Pennsylvania Port Authority, the Erie Land Bank, and Erie City Revitalization and Improvement Zone Authority. She is deeply involved in her church, organizing the annual Russian Troika Festival, leading the choir, I sing too, awesome. We'll talk about that later, and volunteering at Emmaus Soup Kitchen, and coordinating support for the Overflow Homeless Shelter. A proud graduate of Erie's public schools, Daria holds degrees from Colgate and Edinburgh universities. She lives in Erie with her husband, Neil, their 3 sons, and Daria's deep roots in Erie and commitment to its future make her a strong leader and advocate for our community. Welcome, Daria Devlin. I'm so excited to have you here.
Thanks for having me. I feel like I could just leave now. You said all the great things.
This is all the campaigning we need to do, honestly. That's quite an impressive bio. You've had quite a history. I want to start off with just asking you, what is it about? Why are you running for mayor?
Thank you. And it is humbling, to hear a bio like that. And I feel very blessed to have done a lot of the things I've done. So thank you for that.
Of course.
So why am I running for mayor? Well, I think most of that answer comes from what you just said. So I have been committed to Erie from the jump, from day one, mm-hmm. right? I'm going to be 48 next month, and I would say from day one. I came back to Erie. I went away to college. I lived in Pittsburgh for a bit. My husband was in law school there, and we made the decision together to come to Erie. And I did that because from the time I was a little girl, my parents had instilled in me this idea that, first, service, mm-hmm. and second, Erie is a place where you can make a difference.
Yes.
And so came back to Erie and started making a difference in little ways, doing some of the work I was doing with nonprofits. And as my skills grew, I realized that my impact could too. Mm-hmm. And as I have gotten older and kind of ventured into politics a little on the Erie School Board, I realize I have what it takes to lead, and I'm a problem solver. But I think that the real reason at the root is the last thing you said, which I have 3 sons. Mm-hmm. They're grown men. Gosh, sort of. They think they are. But they're grown, and they're heading out into their own lives and into the world, and I want them to come back to Erie. And I want Erie to be a place where they want to come back to, and it's not what I see right now. And so that's really at the heart of why I'm running.
Thank you so much. And I want to delve into the questions, and I'm going to start with a bit of a more national question, but it's one that impacts us here in Erie a great deal. Mm-hmm. Erie has a significant refugee population. Starting after World War I, we saw a major influx of Polish, Italian, and other Eastern European refugees coming into Erie. And then in the 90s, we saw a big group of people from the Democratic Republic of Congo, Bosnia, and Albania fleeing genocide at home. And then since our wars in the 2000s in the Middle East, there's been a big influx of Afghan, Yemenis, Iraqi, Syrian, and Latin American refugees settle here in Erie. I don't want to talk too much about the president, but
thank you.
Donald Trump has blocked refugee resettlement in the United States of America for 90 days. That is very likely to see an extension and likely to remain not only a hot button issue throughout his term, but probably a priority for his administration. But refugees resettling in Erie is actually a very key part of our economy. These are people that are, A, buoying our population here as the population overall has decreased, and B, staffing local businesses. So I'd love to hear your vision and your plan for what you would like to do to make sure that local businesses have the people that they need and advocating for those people to still be able to come here.
Yeah, absolutely. So I really appreciate you gave the history of refugees because we are a community of immigrants. My great-grandparents were Russian immigrants, and most of my family was born down in the middle state of Pennsylvania after emigrating from Russia, and they went there to work in the mines, and then they heard there was work up on the docks, and so they all moved up to Erie, and that's why the Russian neighborhood was on the waterfront, because that's where the work was. So this is all of us. I mean, this is all of our roots. This is who we all were and are at some point in our own personal journeys. So I think that's really important to remember. This is not something new to Erie. It's what built Erie to begin with.
Correct.
So absolutely, and I want to say too, the early stages of my career, just coincidentally, I worked for an immigration attorney right out of college. Wasn't sure what I wanted to do. My husband was in law school. So I was working like pre-September 11th on lots of legal immigration stuff, H-1B visas, permanent residency, like getting the skills we needed to the United States. That was a lot of the work that I did. So I really understand, first of all, legal immigration is a serious process, and it is a real process. And the people that go through it have really worked hard to get here. So I don't think we can ever lose sight of that first.
Correct.
In terms of refugees, you nailed it with your point. Our population continues to decline. We have to stop that. Now, I think there's multiple ways to do it.
Yes.
But the resettlement of refugees is key to that.
Yes.
So here's what I think, right? We are not going to be terribly successful to stop what's happening at the federal level. We can act. I think we should. I think we should be outraged, and I think we should say what we need to say. But at the same time, we need to make sure at the local level that we know our rights, that our residents know their rights, that we as a community protect each other and make sure that, we abide by law. We have to abide by federal law. We know that, but that our residents know our rights. We know our rights as a community, and we look out for our neighbors. And I think if we do that, we will survive whatever goes on, and we will be able to stand firm and make sure that we do have what we need. Never stop advocating, of course. But let's act here locally to protect ourselves.
Yes, and showing that, changing hearts and minds, as cheesy as it sounds, standing strong with our neighbors can make a difference and convince people, this is important. And it's so much more than just a social issue. I'm putting that in quotes for those listening. And it really does go right to the heart of our economy here in Erie. So.
It does. And I think we have work to do there, too. If I could just say, I have met with so Gary Horton over at the Quality of Life Center. Gary has a real beat on some of the new American communities, and he gave me some suggestions of some folks to talk to kind of in like my listening tour as I'm, getting ready to run and now running. And one of the women I met really had an interesting point, and that was we need to do better with English education for our refugees. Like we do it in pockets, like Gary does it over at his center. I know the other MCRC and International Institute do. But I think as a community, we have a responsibility to help those folks with their English language learning so that they can then take part in the economy. And I think there's a bit of a gap there.
Yes.
And as a community, I'd like to see us do that better.
Now, is there something that you think as mayor you would have the ability to do there that you think would be helpful?
I think that we need to look at that from a citywide level and see where the gaps are. I mean, and again, part of being, in my mind, what, people will say, what are you going to do as mayor? You lead.
Yes.
And leading means seeing what are the big issues that are facing our entire community, convening the folks who are doing that work or have information on that issue, and identifying the gaps and how we can work. I mean, we might not be able from the city level to push out programs, but we could surely make sure that things are aligned, and where we see gaps, we can help support them. And that's what I would do as mayor.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So another question that I have for you is, and this is an issue facing cities all across the country, but also in Erie. There's not been much growth in our new housing in Erie for properties under $500,000 really since the end of World War II. So what do you view as your role as the political leader of Erie City government and overseeing the building of housing that is going to incentivize young people, young professionals to move into Erie City limits and start raising families?
Yeah. And Kyle, I'm going to tell you, I think it's more than just building, right? It's also renovating and rehabbing.
Yes.
So we have very, very old housing stock. We know this about the state of Pennsylvania. If you've seen what Governor Shapiro has done, he's made it a state priority because he knows throughout the state. And in Erie, we certainly are facing that as well. So we need to really identify, and we've done some of this work. The Erie Refocus Plan that Bluesky did, which by the way now is like 10 years old and probably needs to be slightly refreshed, does give us a roadmap a bit to say this is how many blighted properties we have, can be rehabbed. So I think we need to go back and look at that. I think as mayor, what I would like to do is create a housing action plan and that's not a housing study. It's not just numbers on pages.
Right.
It's It's what's the data tell us? What have we got? What could be rehabbed? What needs to go? And then when that goes, what land is available for us to maybe build on? But I think that housing action plan is key. So we really have some data. Because right now I see a lot of work happening, but it's like, do we need more in the middle market? Do we need, where really is the issue? One really big area I'm interested in is senior housing. And this came out of a housing forum that I did go to that the governor had put on in Erie a couple weeks ago. And the comment was made, we don't have enough housing for seniors in the city of Erie. Places, I'm not talking about, assisted living. I'm talking about just like senior living. And what's that's doing, it's keeping seniors in their homes maybe longer than they want to be because they don't have anywhere to go.
Got it.
And then that is clogging up the market in the middle for new homeowners. And so it's a really interesting idea to say, where can we really target? Maybe it is senior development that we want to go after. We have vacant land throughout the city. Could we be strategic with those, do an RFP for developers or local developers or ones from out of town who have done this in the past and start to build in a particular area, I mean geographic, but also in the market, so that then we can create that pipeline back up. So I think it's lots of different places where we have to work together, but housing action plan first, and then really an RFP to say, okay, what developer has expertise in that particular area? Let's give them direction and let's do this with strategy.
Got it. So I like hearing the word action because we're not talking about
no more plans,
numbers on papers, and
plans
kind of sits in a drawer.
That's right. Plans are fine. And I will say we need action in this community. I think we've studied enough. Let's get the data we need and let's go to work.
Absolutely. Awesome. So our budget deficit in the city of Erie for 2024 was $5.4 million. Do you have a plan to increase the tax base within the city? Perhaps even tying to that question around housing, that will help make a dent in that deficit without needing to raise taxes or cut essential services like plowing, zoning, social work, code enforcement, and police and fire department budgets.
So let's say first that we as residents of the city of Erie, we pay a lot in taxes, right? And I happened to see my escrow statement yesterday from the bank, and I was like, yeah, okay, there's my tax bill in there.
Yeah.
We pay a significant amount in taxes, and I would first say I'm not sure we as residents are getting our money's worth. Okay. So we do need to make sure that we're doing better for our residents in terms of those basic services that you just mentioned.
Yes.
That's what we pay taxes for, and we need to see some return on that. So when we have really big snowstorms, we need to do better with how we're reacting, right? So I really think that that's number one. But then the answer is, okay, Daria, that stuff's expensive.
Yes.
We can't raise taxes anymore. How do we keep this going? You mentioned last year's, the end of last year. I'm really concerned, Kyle, with the structural deficit. So, a structural deficit is when every year over year, you're spending more than you have.
Right.
And that, without doing anything to adjust,
right,
you're creating a real problem. And that's where I see the city going. And that's what really concerns me. This year's one thing, 5 years out is another.
Yes.
That's where I get really worried. So how do we solve it, right? We need to intervene now. We cannot raise property taxes. And I would also argue we cannot continue to increase fees, which are just really another way of taxing everybody and probably more regressive because it's flat regardless of what the value of your home is.
Yes.
That's not fair, right? So without all of those things, we have to cut. I do think there are some cuts that can be made, tighten our belts a bit, but we have to figure out different ways to bring more revenue in, and that is expanding the tax base, which is tied just to that last conversation.
Yeah.
We need more people to live in the city of Erie, to buy homes in the city of Erie. We need it for a number of reasons, but increasing that tax base is number one.
Yes.
And then I will say too, I'm very interested, and maybe we'll talk later about this idea of a home rule charter, because one of the things that a home rule charter would allow us to do is get some flexibility with some of our taxing abilities. Now that, for example, in Lancaster, what I've understood is they went to home rule charter because the ability to increase the cap on their earned income tax allowed them to go like 10 years without forecasting property taxes. Okay. Those are the creative things we have to be thinking about right now. So I think all of those things are on the table. We really cannot continue to tax our existing residents any further.
Right.
We need to do better by them with what they're paying, and we need to do some real intervention now to get at this long-term structural deficit.
Okay, great. Well, as a new homeowner in Erie City, I love to hear it. Yes.
Well, I love to hear you're a new homeowner.
Yeah.
So thank you for that.
We moved in May. It's been great, but would love to keep it reasonable, and I'm glad to hear you talk about that.
We have to, for sure.
Absolutely. So if elected, we're talking about some great plans here. If elected, you will be the executive of the Erie City Legislature, or our city council. My first question, I have a few that stem from that statement. How do you ensure good faith partnership and cooperation in setting the agenda and making sure that you're in charge of that agenda and that people are willing to work with you?
Number one, it's transparency.
Yes.
And number two is accountability.
Okay.
So in terms of transparency, I have a relationship on the Erie School Board that's similar. We have a superintendent who's our executive, and then we as the board is like the council. We have kind of an unwritten rule. We don't surprise each other. We really try not to make each other look bad in public. If we have disagreements, let's hash them out and let's make sure we at least are talking to one another behind the scenes.
Yes.
And let's have an open line of communication. I'll give you an example of something that really kind of bothered me a bit. I was in a meeting about LRTA, actually, in the summertime when the new taxing, when it was going to sunset.
And we'll talk about that later.
Okay,
everybody.
great. Yeah. So I won't give it all away.
Yeah.
But, we were in a meeting with the Mayor's Business Council, and one of the Mayor's Business Council asked him, well, where's council on this issue? And he actually said he wasn't sure. And that struck me as, this is a pretty big issue.
Mm-hmm.
You probably want to know where your council members are, and they probably would have wanted to hear from you already before you're out talking to others. So we have to be in communication. We have to have that transparency. I've said this to folks. We might not always get along. We might not always agree. What you can always expect from me, though, is to be a straight shooter, to sit across the table and look you in the eye and really tell you what I think. And I think we need more of that to foster collaboration between our executive and our council. That's number one. And accountability is number two.
Okay.
The council needs to hold the mayor accountable, and the mayor needs to push council when needed. But I think that willingness to be accountable, willing to say if something was done wrong, we fix it, and willing to say, I'll stand on these issues and decisions in front of the public with you, I think that goes a long way. That's where you build trust. So that I would really foster that kind of relationship from day one with council, regardless of who they are.
Great. And yeah, I mean, you're talking about transparency and accountability. That kind of feeds into the word authenticity, which we've been hearing so much about when we talk about political candidates. And I think that direct line to the people that voted for you is so crucial. So I'm glad to hear you say that. The second question that I have for you relating to that is part of what unites us as Democrats is a kind of a core set of beliefs around, and I put social issues in quotes earlier, but there are a lot of hot button issues that really rile people up right now that become lightning rods for criticism. And, you breathe the wrong sentence in the direction of one of them and you are the target of criticism. As the mayor of Erie, A, what do you view your role as in those issues? And B, how do you stay focused on the actual delivery of the more boring issues that actually deliver for families and people across Erie?
Yeah, this is such a great question. And it's complicated. So I'm going to take the last part first.
Okay.
Being mayor, in my opinion, is not sexy. I mean, the work is not sexy.
Yeah.
It's the vast majority of people, while they'll talk to you about those big issues, or they'll even talk about things like the CRIZ and the budget, at the end of the day, pick up my garbage, make sure code enforcement's in my neighborhood, plow my streets. Like, these are the core issues for the average residents. And I don't think we can ever lose sight of that.
Right.
We need to meet them where they are and make sure that the city is working for them. So that non-sexy work, it has to be a big part of what we do. At the same time, I think the mayor can take more of a leadership role within the party. For example, in Erie, you hear the old stories, back in like the 60s and 70s about how things worked. I'm certainly not suggesting we go back to that. But I do think the mayor needs to be a spokesperson and be more involved with the party. And here's a reason why I think that's important. We need good candidates at every level. And we need to be more aligned and kind of working better together and building the pipeline for strong, good candidates. And that's from school board, it's from city council. And I think the mayor can have a real role in that. As I'm elected and I'm working with others and meeting others, I think there's a real ability there to work on those issues together. Now, I will say, it's a tough time to be a politician. I mean, it is a tough time, and everything you say, it's just, who is going to be offended. I have said from the beginning, at least for me, I'm stealing a bit from Barack Obama here.
Okay.
Like, this has to be a big tent. We got to make room for everybody.
Completely
and I
agree.
think nationally as Democrats, we got to do better there. And certainly locally, when, to be honest, for the most part, we all want the same things. We
Completely
all
agree.
need to focus on our local, what's happening here. Again, back to protecting each other and our neighbors. So let's have that big tent. Let's make space for good conversation and disagreement, but let's really be careful that we're not putting people in buckets, because I really think that divides us, and then we can't get anything done. And that's the last thing we need for our community.
Completely agree. And Daria, maybe unknowingly, I'm not sure, just went to the heart of the title of this podcast, Left, Wrong, and Center. It's all about uniting. It's all about having a big tent and having good faith disagreement. So I love that answer. That's a great answer.
Great.
And then this is kind of taking a left turn from that. What is your belief on districting within the city? Do you think we should continue to have citywide elections for city council, or do you think we should break up into neighborhoods so that perhaps, maybe you do or don't agree, but different neighborhoods get more equity in their elections and their representatives?
Yeah. So first of all, I think that's an opportunity with the Home Rule Charter. So I think that would be something, if we get to that point, that the commissioners could really look at. And I know that may probably be something on the table. It's interesting because my gut is to say, yes, let's district to make sure we have good representation. But I did have a conversation with a member of the Black community recently, and their comment to me was this: every time we make some progress, it feels like the goalpost changes a little bit. Mm-hmm. We're actually getting representation on council. And so now all of a sudden to change those rules, is that actually going to hurt us when we finally have started to get some momentum? I don't feel particularly educated on that topic to speak to it. Okay. So I think it's just something to keep in mind, that it's not just necessarily true that once we district, we're going to be better in terms of representation. I think we need to look at that very closely and make sure, like I said, that we're not changing the rules just all of a sudden when we are starting to see some of that representation. So Home Rule Charter, if we go there, I hope that's a really big topic for our commissioners to study.
Okay. And that's a good point. That didn't even cross my mind.
I hadn't either until he said it, which is why we go out and listen, right?
Yes.
Which is why we have those conversations.
Absolutely. So some good news, everybody. I know the world feels a little bleak right now. Erie's violent crime rate has actually remained pretty low and fallen under Democratic leadership. There were just 6 homicides in the city of Erie in 2024, which is down from 14 in 2023. There were 18 shootings, down from 49 in 2023, and aggravated assault and robbery crimes also decreased in 2024. So 2 questions here. As mayor, how will you partner with local law enforcement to see our crime rate continue to decrease? That's number one.
Well, first of all, I think that our move toward community-based policing is really incredibly important. And I have been really happy in the past few weeks to have some conversations, to view some places where I see that community-based policing happening. And I think that's really key to a lot of this. I think we're building relationships in the places we need to, and I think we need to continue that. And I think that that's part of some of the success, and I want to definitely see that continue, make sure we have the funding for it. So that's really number one. Secondarily, I think, and I think related, is part of my campaign is really around youth development. Mm-hmm. We need to find good and safe places for our kids from very young ages to express themselves, to feel a sense of belonging, to make sure that they're not falling into those places, which I think is typically what happens. If you don't give a kid a sense of belonging, they're going to go where they find it. And sadly, for a really good period of time there, they were going into places we really didn't want them to go. Right. So I think that I also want to really emphasize this idea of youth development, positive programming for our kids, focus on the Erie School District, that I'll always continue to do because it's my heart, but making sure that our youth have those positive experiences with the police, but also in the community. I think really that's the key where we need to go to keep this going. And you're absolutely right. We're on the right track. Of course, we want to get to it where there's none,
of
right?
Course,
that's the ultimate goal. Yeah. So let's really continue what's working there and beef up some of that youth development. I think it only continue to get better.
Perfect. And that kind of leads into the second question. So it might sound a little bit similar, but what do you believe your role as mayor will be to build public trust and relationships between and with law enforcement and members of the Erie community? And
I think I want to go back to that idea of listening. I am, even before running, when people were asking me, what did you just wake up one morning and decide to run? No, I didn't. I had like a million conversations out in the community with people to really hear and listen and understand. That won't stop once I'm elected. I mean, that needs to double down, and we need to be constantly hearing and making sure, because even with the police, I do see these great and wonderful things with community-based policing. We also need to make sure that our police are treating our residents fairly, that we're making sure that that's all there. So I will be out there listening, certainly. And when you ask me about the role of the mayor, again, when we have community issues like like I would say youth development, I do believe it's up to the mayor to step in and convene. You know, when we had a shooting at Erie High School a few years ago, I felt some frustration because my point was, this is not a school issue. This is a community issue. And we need all our leaders to come together and put our heads together on this. So as mayor, I would actively work to say, if issues are bubbling, or even if we're just starting to, wanting to make sure we're being proactive, let's convene people in the room. I think that's what that's the power of the mayor's office.
Yes.
And then kind of go forth and do from there. That's how I would see my role.
Okay. Awesome. And this is unrelated to what we just talked about, but what would you say is the mayor's role in, and how would you work to maintain our minor league sports teams and not lose them to larger cities? I mean, it sounds a little bit silly, I guess, but I think it's a concern that people might have. And
I spoke to someone last night who said to me, isn't Erie's economy just tourism? And I was like, oh, no, I hope not. It's not. But it's a part of it, right? I mean, we want Erie to be a place where people can come and have fun. And I have 3 sons, so I do a lot of sporting events. So I definitely think it's a key part of who we are as a community. It also sends a signal about our status as a community, right? If we continue to lose population and numbers go down. So what's the mayor's role? I think that the mayor's role in all of these conversations is the face-to-face communication in talking with those leaders, business owners, team owners. Here's why you want to stay.
Yeah.
Here's what we can give. Here's what we can help you with, or on the flip, what's happening? What's wrong? What are the concerns? We need to have a constant level of communication. So we're hearing their problems. We're doing what we can to solve them. And we're just like, I hate to use the word cheerleader, but we are constantly cheering up Erie to say, this is a place you want to be. Look at this ecosystem that's around you. So it's really about that relationship with those folks. I think really that's what the mayor can do. And hearing to say, if there's something wrong, bring it to me so we can make sure we're addressing it. And giving people in Erie something to rally around and celebrate and have fun. It's such an underrated discussion point, I think, in politics, but I think local politics is where that happens. So, and I mean, so we go to church on Saturday nights mostly, and so I don't often get to Erie Otters games. But when I drive home from church, typically up French Street, usually like on a Saturday about 8:00, it is packed downtown. I mean, because lots and lots of people are there. Now they're also supporting local businesses in that area. So yeah, we can't lose those things. And I would say as mayor, you probably noticed from my whole demeanor, I'm going to take an active role. This is not a passive. We don't just sit in the office and kind of wait for things to come to us. We need to be actively out having these conversations. I definitely put that on the list.
Awesome. Now, these are my favorite questions.
Oh.
In terms of economic development here in Erie, I want to talk about LRTA and CRIZ. You mentioned LRTA earlier. Can you first just educate people on what these programs are and what your role in bringing them about, specifically the CRIZ program to Erie, was and were? Sure.
So, I mean, LRTA really is a Joe Schember initiative, and it has worked, and I want to say that. And it's probably the time in the conversation to say this. I have great respect for Joe Schember. I think he's a very good man. I think that some of the things he's done have been just fine and have worked. I simply believe that we need a change in leadership. I'm not here to say that everything he's done has been wrong, because I don't agree with that, and I'm an honest person to say that. So LRTA is certainly something that he's brought. It is, of course, a tax abatement program for folks that do development for a period of time in the city of Erie. My project at Wayne School that you mentioned, we took advantage of LRTA, even though, by the way, as a nonprofit, we do pay taxes because we elected to do that on that property. But LRTA is simply a 10-year tax abatement on new development in the city. It is meant to incentivize development. The data from his office shows it has worked. I think that the data collection and the implementation of that program could be better. That's something I'd like to look at once I'm in office. But yeah, so that's LRTA. CRIZ is really exciting. So CRIZ is brand new, and really we have our legislators to thank for this, who have really gone to Harrisburg for us at the state level and actively advocated for it. So what the CRIZ does essentially is it takes some local taxes, not property taxes. This is a place people get confused. So that's how it's very different from LRTA, which really deals with property tax. The CRIZ takes other taxes, namely entertainment tax. For us, what's really interesting in particular is your insurance premium tax that's paid by insurance companies. It takes those taxes that would typically be sent to Harrisburg and instead returns them to the municipality. So the CRIZ zone is 130 acres, so that's a map within the city of Erie. It is not contiguous, so it's property by property that's been determined by the CRIZ board. And any taxes that are raised in that zone that would normally go to Harrisburg come back to the municipality, to the CRIS authority, to be deployed right here at home.
Okay.
So, for example, we were given the CRIS designation at the end of 24. Again, really thanks to our state legislators. Can't say enough about that. 2025 is our baseline year, which means that they will evaluate the taxes that are being paid in those particular categories in that zone, and that will be our baseline. Let's say it's $10 million, and that will go to Harrisburg.
Got it.
But in 2026, any amount of growth between that baseline and what we see in 26, that is called increment, and that will come back here. Because Erie Insurance is in the CRIS zone, and because the insurance premium tax has been included in the legislation, their tax alone will likely get us $10 to $15 million in the first year and every year thereafter.
Got it.
So we are really talking about 30 years. That's the life of the CRIS legislation, of $10 to $15 million every year coming right back here, not being paid to Harrisburg for deployment locally.
I love that. And
everyone loves it.
And you're mentioning the state legislators, excuse me. You played a role in this, correct? You did play a role in.
I cannot take credit for this. I'm on the CRIS authority.
Okay.
So, behind the scenes, certainly advocating for it. But when the time came for the authority to be created, and the authority needs to be created because there's a lot of money that needs to be decided on, I was nominated or appointed by Representative Bluesky to sit on. So I'm his representative on the CRIS authority. But no, I mean, really in this case, we have to thank, Bob Bluesky and Ryan Bizzaro and Pat Harkins and Dan Laughlin too, who all went to Harrisburg and advocated for us.
Got it. So you mentioned, I'm going to come back, both of these warrant further conversation, I think, but with LERTA, you mentioned that the 10-year business startup program that we've seen some success with. You say that you think that there are ways that it could be better implemented. One, I'm curious to hear what those ways are. And two, how do you keep that going for businesses? How do we keep businesses in Erie after that initial 10-year startup period and ensure that we're keeping business in Erie?
Sure. Well, LERTA is intended that you got a break on your taxes to build or to improve. So the hope is that you're going to stay after that, right? But you're right. I mean, that was a concern early on with the program. People would come, they'd get their 10 years and then they'd be out. I think we have seen that hasn't happened. But again, this is where the active nature of the role comes into play. If this is happening, let's go have those meetings with those business. Hey, how's it going? What else do you need? How are you doing with workers?
Yes.
Right? Because that's another part of the puzzle. So I think actively looking to make sure that they're happy and they're staying and they're seeing that ecosystem. But I will say with the program implementation, what we saw, because the school district had to approve it too as a taxing body, I didn't see the communication I would like to have seen between the city and county. Of course, the county handles the tax bills. The city wasn't always communicating. You go to the city for your permit. That's where you file for your LERTA. But then when you're done and you get your certificate of completion, it's supposed to go to the county for to send the tax bill. There was just some mess there that I think we can clean up, and some better communication. So those are the kinds of things, again, within City Hall. It's bureaucratic, to be honest, but we need to have continuous improvement. And I would just want to look at those systems to make sure that we are collecting the tax when it is due. And I think that there's some room for improvement on that one.
Got it. And then with CRIS, you mentioned it's a 30-year life cycle of the legislation. So, I mean, this is my ignorance here. Does that get touched at all during the next however many years? And once that 30-year term is up, which would be long past the next couple of years, what happens then? Do we just...
I don't believe that that legislation has been extended. We're not the first CRIS. There are other CRISs that have been created and designated. So, I mean, I think that will be for legislators long after us. But I would say our focus should be 30 years of $15 million a year. Man, let's make the most of that.
Absolutely.
Right? I mean, what could we do in that period of time? And, just in case folks are wondering kind of how that money can be used, it can be used for capital improvements. So, huge projects that we might not otherwise have had the money for. It can be used to help with debt service on capital improvements. So maybe you have a nonprofit that says, we'll take out the debt, but we need help paying that debt service every single year. It can be used as small business loans. So for folks that want to start a business in the zone, not build the building, but come in behind it and have the business, it can be used to help them buy equipment. So, I mean, really the possibilities are endless. We got to get it right.
Yes.
And I think that needs to be our focus particularly over this first period and then moving forward from there.
Right. And you hear, we're talking about to the listeners, we're talking about these questions that all kind of tie together. You mentioned communication with LERTA and going into these businesses and seeing what else they need. And do you have the people that you need, which ties to our very first question about refugee resettlement. It all ties together. And I think that's something that a lot of people maybe don't recognize. So I appreciate you going so in detail on this.
And housing, Kyle. I mean, I would say too, when we talk, and I've had these conversations, it's very interesting. I attended something recently where Tina Mangine from the County Redevelopment Authority shared this triangle of business attraction. So what businesses are looking for kind of when they want to relocate in a community. Housing is squarely in the middle of that. So if there's not affordable, quality, sufficient housing for their workers, this is going to put Erie lower on their list. And we have to be thinking it's all tied together. And that's why we really need to be actively working towards all these things at the same time.
Absolutely. So if elected, what will your administration do to partner with the Erie Downtown Corporation to ensure new project and revitalization efforts continue in Erie City?
Yeah, I mean, I think the work of the EDDC is fantastic. I've met with Drew and understand. And I think we all have to be honest that, there's been enormous investment there. A lot of that has been private investment. I think Drew has noted, there's not one state dollar in any of those projects. So the fact that we've gotten those going in Erie privately is pretty impressive. Yeah. And I really applaud the work that's been done at EDDC. We want to continue that certainly. And I mean, I would say it's great work, but man, we got a lot of downtown that we need to deal with. So EDDC can be one of those tools. I would also add that we need to make sure that the investments that have been done downtown translate into our neighborhoods so that everyone can take advantage of this wonderful investment and improvement that's happened. I have concerns sometimes that hasn't always been. It's wonderful. It's amazing. The people that go. We need to make sure that investment seeps out and we make sure that everybody is taking advantage, all boats rise together kind of thing. That I think that's kind of the next step in the evolution of that work to make sure that it's accessible to everyone.
Great. That's awesome. And that was kind of the last question that I had written down, but I've heard a lot of very detailed thoughts on the future. I've heard so many specifics. I really love that. I want to end on a high note. What is it that you love about Erie? And you mentioned kind of what got you running and what interests you and what you want to fix, but what is it that you love about Erie and what is it that makes you want to keep giving back?
Yeah, I think I would say number one, this is something that my father said to me. Erie is a place where you can make a difference, no matter who you are. And I say that because it's a big enough place where, we have real things going on. We have real challenges, but it's small enough that we can solve them. And that, I don't know that I could run for office in a place like Philadelphia or San Francisco where the challenges are just, I don't even know where you begin.
Right.
In a place like Erie, we can fix these things.
Yes.
They are small enough, they are manageable enough, and we have the most amazing people, the talent that's here, the dedication and commitment and love. I mean, I won't even talk about the natural resources that we have, and people come here and they're like, this lake is amazing, but it's really, for me, it's the people and the talent and the joy that people bring to this community and what that can translate. It's, to me, the possibilities are endless.
Yes.
And so, as I look for my role in that, it's really just to step in and try to help lead it because, again, all the pieces are here. And I just think with strong leadership, some energy, and some active work on some of these issues, I really believe the possibilities are endless.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Our first guest. How exciting.
Very exciting.
I just want to make sure that I thank Daria Devlin for stopping in. Where can we find you on social media, on the internet? How can people follow along with your campaign?
Thank you. So we have a website, dariaforerie.com, and our social's the same, Daria for Erie. So it's, pretty simple. It's not a number 4. It's the word 4. I've gotten some questions about that. Yeah.
F-O-R.
F-O-R,
yes.
dariaforerie.com. We have information there about how to contribute to the campaign, how to support the campaign, and I'm going to be out talking to people. So if folks want to have a conversation with me, please reach out because we're ready to talk to everybody.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. Good luck with this. It's really exciting.
Thank you. We're
Thanks.
off to a good start.